Hello everyone, this time part 3 of how to make comics. It will be more about styles of characters, so you can use this more to do a character design. I will make this introduction short because the video is kinda long. I will see you in the next frame. We will start with realism. This style has grown in popularity, especially because of the internet, and overseas it's a very well requested style, they ask. One of the things you need to keep in mind with realism is that it's based on real life, so the style is realistic. Proportions of humans, expressions, buildings, scenery, everything has real life sizes. Of course, you have monsters in realistic comics too, but all the proportions are based on animals, nature itself, etc. One of the things that I find quite helpful to use, because hands are seen as one of the most difficult parts of a human to draw, is comparing it to what's a good way to know when you have a right drawn hand or not. One of the things are, a hand is almost the same size as your head. If you put your hand over your head, it will almost cover your entire head. It will be a bit smaller, maybe you have a very big hand, so maybe it will cover it all. But that's a good way to see if you draw a good hand stretched out, at least in size. Then you have the limbs, the way they bend, the way they look in lines. They are quite similar, at least if you draw them naked. You also need to make sure that you look at the way how clothes fold when you move. Then you have tons of examples in eyes, but one thing that's sure with the realistic is that mostly the lines connect with each other. Then you have the mouth. With the mouth, with the female, you have a lot of options, but with males they tend to use less detail, because then you have the risk that the male will look female-like. Further, some easy steps for shape of the head. How do you know how to draw a realistic face? What I learned from my art teacher is if you draw two circles, one a bit smaller than the other, you quite simply already have a face that has the shape of a realistic face. With the male you have a larger circle than a female. That's mostly because of the jaw. The under circle of the head is mostly the jawline, and the other part is just your forehead and where your eyes will line up. And if you have it sideways, you will see that if you use the two circles, you can easily shape a sideways head as well. Then you have the noses. You have tons of noses you can create. I suggest that you look up in the internet or just observe people, draw people, and see what kinds of noses you like to draw. Every face is different, so don't use the same face shape over and over again, except when they're like relatives or something, or twins. If you look at how they make hair, it shows that they don't really draw every tiny hair there is on your head, but they use a common shape of how your hair appears, and make realistic shapes of lines to show how it falls. Next up is the still line, created in Belgium by comic artist Hergé. Here it's also called KlareLijn. Remarkable things about the style is that the lines always have the same leanness. They are very thin lines and backgrounds are very simplistic. Characters tend to stand out because they have very simplified shapes, and as you can see it's very round shaped. Every line connects with another line. It doesn't have open lines. If they are open, then they will be closed by coloring. The colors are also very still and simplistic. You don't have shades, you don't have gradient, it's all very still, which explains also the name. You can have different kinds of proportions, normally the realistic proportions, but I also have seen that they use big heads and small bodies, especially by toddlers. Eyes are normally just pupils made with stripes, dots, highly when they are surprised that they make a little more eye you see in. Next up is a French style, which is also called l'école marsaillant. That's because of the city where the comic artist who created this, Francois, made it. And this is the opposite of the still line. It has very much dynamic expression. It does have realistic backgrounds, but the characters overall are everything but realistic. The limbs are based on realistic proportions, but the way you draw feet or hands, they can be much bigger. One of the other names this style has is the big nose style. That's because in the beginning of this style, almost every character had a huge nose. Sometimes female characters had little noses, but mostly they were just huge. With the eyes, there are a lot of variations in eyes. If you name it, it's possible. Sometimes they also use realistic eyes, sometimes they use eyes which more relates to the still line. And what about face shapes? There's a lot of possibility here. If you look at the animation you see from Disney now, if you look at that, well, there's a high probability that the French style has influenced them or the other way around. You can also use funny lines and styles on objects like cars, so they become a living object to themselves. So if you want to use a French style, it's known for its dynamic, for its expression, and it's ideal to use for hilarious comics, so for gag comics. They also tend to use it for a little bit of a children adventure book, or just an adventure book, but then you have to use a little bit more realistic in the eyes or seriousness and expression and backgrounds. Now last but not least, manga, anime style, Japanese style, how you want to call it. The proportions are based on realistic proportions as usual, but there are similar other kinds of uses in proportions and when it comes down to manga. One of the things that really marks the manga of the other styles is the use of the eyes and expression, of course. They introduced kind of expressions and style uses you didn't have in other kinds of styles. The eyes don't connect to other lines, so your upper line of your eye and the under line of your eye don't connect to each other. Further, of course, the pupils are made kawaii, so very cute, big and shiny. They always shimmer with joy or sadness. The shape of the heads is very different as well. When you look at the male, you can use always one circle to define if it's going to be a male or female. After you have the circle, draw a bit of a more square-like head for the male and a more rounded triangular shape for the female. The female face is often smaller than the male face, like it always tends to be. When you look at noses, there are a lot of options. You can have a very simplistic nose, which is just a dot, but you can also have a very detailed nose. Same goes for the eyes. Even though there are a lot of options and they tend to be big, you also have mangas with more realistic shaped and sized eyes. One of the other things that really marks the manga is, of course, the hair. The hair tends to be unrealistic, gel-like and stiff. Now you want to know in what kind of genre, what kind of style suits best. When you look at realistic, you can practically make almost everything except a gag. Gag isn't really good to use with realism because it's tend to be less expressive. If you look at the colors, there are different kinds of things you can use for different kinds of genres. If you want a bit of a more dark story, Don't use bright colors, just use more gray tones and earth tones. If you want a more adventurous story, you can use, of course, the more colorful colors like red, yellow, blue, and the more not realistic colors. If you look at the still line, one thing that marks that most is that it's brightly colored and not realistic. The only thing that's realistic is, well, the proportions. If you want to know what kind of genre you want to use here, it can be a gag comic or it can be an adventure comic, but it's also used for the more autobiographic literature kind of thing, because it tends to be a more serious style than it may seem at first sight. It's also possible that you use another kind of style that's based on the still line, and that's called the atom style of the atom bomb. This uses more expression and it uses shades and the thick lines you tend to see with the French style. It's used for gag comics a lot, but not for adventure really, but of course it's possible. With the French style, you can use it for adventure comics, for gag comics, for actually everything you need to use the style for. It's especially good in using it for adventure comics with a lot of gagging in them, but if you want to make a more darker comic, it is possible, but I won't recommend. The colors are bright and use shades, and further they tend to have more a realistic kind of color use than the still line is. Still, for the characters, they also use the not realistic colors to let them stand out with the realistic colors. With manga, you can of course make all kinds of stories you want. This is, of course, it's a specific style in a specific country, so they use this style for everything also. I just showed a little small bit of the styles you have in manga, but there are a lot of options, from not realistic at all to a bit realistic or almost realistic. The colors are gray tones and marsaillant, so stripes or dots that differentiate the background or foreground or whatever color there is inside the manga. Don't forget to draw from right to left, the way you read, and not from left to right, how the Western countries you read. That's a very good thing you don't need to forget. I hope you all enjoyed the video and learned a lot from it, and feel free to show all your efforts or whatever from these videos. I'm glad to hear if you use this well and if it is very informative or if it isn't. See you in the next class.